attended council hearings in person. You've tuned into our televised proceedings on Channel 13. Now, you have the chance to listen to us on the radio as we demystify our work and the people who do it. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council with your host, Josh Gibson.
Thank you, deep voice person with a funky backbeat. Indeed, this is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. You can't have a government without a council, so you can't have a government radio station without a council show. This is it. I'm Josh Gibson, Director of Communications for the Council. You may also know me as the Council's voice on social media, at Council of DC. It's been a while since we've had a new episode. We are thrilled to be back with Ward 3 Councilmember Matt Frumin, who I think is making his third appearance on the show. It's been about a year. Thanks for returning to the radio show and podcast. I'm very grateful. And I'm always an admirer of your wife's art in the background.
Thank you very much.
Always have to mention that. So we have a very interesting mix of topics that we're going to tackle on today's show. And we'll just jump right into the first one, which is incredibly important, out of school time. And one of your early signature legislative introductions was a bill regarding out of school time and funding of out of school time. So why don't you talk a bit about your what you introduced and your motivations?
Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you for admiring my wife's artwork, which is everywhere in our office. I am very fortunate. She's created a wonderful feel in our home and in my office. So out of school time is a big challenge that the city faces, is that we have way too many children who feel like they don't have hope for their future and don't feel supported in the way that we want them to feel supported, so that they stay on a positive track. And when that happens, the possibility of crime and kids getting involved in things that they should not only goes up. So creating out of school time programming, and great out of school time programming, is both an equity issue in giving all of our children the opportunity to thrive, but it's also a public safety issue, because to the extent that our children feel like we are working to create opportunity for them, we keep them on a positive track. And that's why I forget exactly the number, but it's on the order of 80% of police chiefs have said the most effective tool to avert juvenile crime is good out of school time programming. So this is a priority for everyone in the DC government. The deputy mayor and the mayor have made this a significant priority. The question is, what are the things that we can do? How can we invest as effectively as possible in this sector in order to create opportunities that help keep our kids on track? And that's why I came forward with legislation to try to bolster this sector. There's been a couple of things that have been challenges for the sector in recent years. Some is a little bit of gear shifting on funding, because from year to year, they may wait. The programs that are working in this area may hear very late that they've been approved for the next year. You want to make that work more smoothly where you can. Other issues have been around security, paying for security, and how the costs for that are borne between the different programs, and how we expand the programming so we're making it available universally. These are not things that the executive is hostile on. These are things where the executive actually is working hard on it, and now we seek to work in partnership with them to try to push this forward. And I feel very good about it. I had hoped to get a hearing on the bill before the budget process. We came out with the bill shortly before the budget process, and I'd hoped to get a hearing. part of the reason for that was not necessarily to get the bill passed immediately, but to have an impact on the budget process, to have lots of folks come in, testify, and talk about how important this issue is, so that we could be having an effect both on the mayor and the council in the budget process. For the most part, I think just introducing the legislation may have helped to have that effect, to underscore this is a priority for the council. We had a very significant number of council members join as co-introducers. And it's not that the executive doesn't have this as a priority, but it's always good to let the executive know how much of a shared priority it is.
Right. And in terms of the concept, it's in a way, I mean, it's as old as the old adage that idle hands do the devil's work, that when folks don't have a productive thing to focus on, it doesn't excuse the behavior, but it definitely explains the behavior that sometimes they can get up to nonsense. And really, this is the goal. This is the goal. It's a, you know, a very something we're all familiar with, after school activities, you know, but if the result of kids being productively engaged is that communities are safer, it just seems like a no-brainer to put our money into this.
I mean, I think that it is, and I think it's not just that the hands aren't idle, but the hands might be introduced to a thing that they hadn't been introduced to before. So you bring in programming, you know, there's all different kinds of things. There's sports programming that's helpful in getting kids moving, introducing them to a new sport. There's other kinds of programming where they're learning about something that supports what they're learning during the school day, but is different than what they're learning during the school day because there's a limit on how many topics you can cover. So this gives us an opportunity. You know, there had been talk over the years about an expanded school day and an expanded school year. And you could have school last till 5 o'clock, but it wouldn't be particularly different from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock than it was from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Here, we're doing the thing that an extended school day would do, but we're allowing for more creativity, more variety in that space to keep kids engaged and to give them yet another reason to want to come to school.
Right. And I think many of us, when we think back to our school days, we think as much of activities we did that were school related, but maybe outside of school, after school, than we do of the literal classes, the literal education. And it's a key part of the process.
And that's exactly right. And we can think back. To me, as I think back about it, you know, there were theater kids who were into theater and they did that after school. There were band kids who did band stuff, and they did that often after and before school. You're absolutely right that school becomes a center, but there are things around it that grab the child's interest and hold them to the school and make the school experience that much better for them, including, you know, you can have a thing where, say it's a soccer program, and kids who don't know each other from other places get to know each other through the soccer program, and then they're that much more comfortable with each other during the course of the day. This is a way to mix it up, reach our kids, and push towards our goal of having our kids engaged and thriving.
Right. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, I think there was back in the Clinton era when there was a huge polarizing debate about midnight basketball. And it was this similar argument. It was that if folks have something to do, they might not get into some of the trouble that they would turn to otherwise. And there's all the other intangibles, like you said, in terms of feelings of togetherness. And I remember, this is before social media, but it was one of those almost social media level fights over midnight basketball. How can we as a government be throwing money at this, what seemed like a frivolity to some people, but is critically important, and might be that, you know, spending money to pay someone to watch a gym and for a couple basketballs if that keeps a neighborhood safer and keeps people involved, Godspeed, you know?
Well, I mean, this won't surprise you. I am a big supporter of ideas like midnight basketball. And on that, you have the dimension of giving kids something positive to do in a way of expending their energy that is positive. But you also have another benefit, which is often those programs were associated with the police department, and you had police forging relationships with teenagers who were playing basketball in a different kind of context than they forge relationships in other settings. And there's a benefit that comes from that. Having our children exposed to many caring adults in different kinds of settings has to help. It's migrating off of this topic, but there is another thing that people have spoken about over the years, and I think it was Chief Conte, when he was the chief. When he was a child, he went to a camp that was run by MPD, where MPD officers forged relationships with young children from the community and were role models for those children, and that helped keep them on the straight and narrow and gave them a positive experience. It's a different area, but that's also the kind of thing we need to be doing in our public safety setting, is creating vehicles for our officers to have relationships with our young people in positive settings and rewarding them for doing that. It's all part of the same thing of showing our children that we care, showing our children that there's a path for them to a successful future, and putting our money where our mouth is on those topics.
Right. I mean, I think the enormous national firestorm surrounding public safety in the district over the past year, sometimes it can get a little simple-minded that having increased safety is only achieved through significant, stern public safety investments. And, you know, that may be a part of the solution, but if something like this, or, you know, in the budget discussion, Councilmember White was talking about housing vouchers. And he said housing vouchers and fighting homelessness are a public safety investment in a different way. If we can do the right thing in other sectors and they have a very clear public safety benefit, we should do that in addition to the more obvious public safety investments that we've made.
I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And, you know, sticking on that for a bit, we in this budget have invested in accountability, and we need to invest in accountability, but we also have to invest in opportunity, and we also have to invest in relationship building. And Councilmember White talked about those issues, talked about, you know, the role that housing vouchers could play in helping to avert having public safety issues. But Councilmember Pinto spoke as loudly on the same topic. You know, we have to walk and chew gum at the same time on these issues, and we cannot pretend that we're simply going to enforce our way out of public safety issues. I don't think the chief thinks we're going to enforce and arrest our way out of these issues. I think the chief believes that there is a lot we need to do on the opportunity side and on the community side. To her credit, she came in, and one of the things that she did is really ramp up community engagement to get at the kind of thing that I'm talking about. You know, they had each PSA would do I think that they were each district was doing one community walk a month, I think, or could even, but they ramped up the number of community walks enormously. That's one way of reaching people, but there's other ways of reaching people. And I don't think this is pushing against resistance. I think this is pushing on an open door, but strengthening the connection between our police and our communities is critical to long-term success in improving public safety.
Right. And I mean, that's the definition of smart government, is thinking of what is the actual goal. The goal is not a full jail, you
Right.
know, in terms of public safety. The goal is less crime, and whatever the means to get to less crime, even if it's a bank shot, you know, which I think out of school time kind of is, that is a far better way. You know, you're enriching children and creating safety. It's a clear win-win. Ditto with the housing vouchers, ditto with the homelessness programs. It's a shame that when we aren't hammer hit nail, you know, in terms of our public safety approach, we get a really tough time for it.
Well, you've got it. I agree with you completely. There is, from a kind of long-term achieving our goal, that it's clear anything other than incarceration is going to be better. And that's not to say there shouldn't be incarceration. There are circumstances where there needs to be incarceration, but we should also be investing to avoid that outcome, because incarceration is the most expensive response. The things that to the extent that we're investing dollars in programs up front to try to avoid that outcome, just from a dollars and cents perspective, that's clearly beneficial as well. So there isn't one answer to the public safety issues that are out there. There are a lot of different answers. And I do think everybody inside of the executive and on the council gets that. It's a question of finding the balance. And that's part of what the struggle in the budget process has been, is finding.
Okay, so to close out on the out of school topic, because we have other topics we need to get to, what is the prognosis? You know, we're getting ready to go into the council recess. We just came out of the budget season. Any bill that's not passed by the end of the council period, by the end of December, turns back into a pumpkin. So do you think, in terms of getting a hearing and ultimate passage, you're where you need to be on this?
So in terms of, I'm very happy with where I am right now, actually, because part of what I'm trying to do is bend the curve on how we together, the executive and the council, respond on this issue. When we came out with our bill, I'll be, you know, maybe mistakenly too candid. I think that there were folks in the executive who felt like, well, why is he doing that? And so there was a little bit of backs getting up about why is he doing that when we're trying as hard as we can. And we've been doing some work in the interim to really make sure that we get very solidly on the same ground as the executive on these issues, so we can be moving forward together. That's a process that started before the budget process and is continued through the budget process. And I think we're going to be working very closely with the executive in the fall to look at what are the ways that we can strengthen this legislation, address their needs, and push forward our shared goals. Whether that leads to a hearing and a markup in this legislative period, or it just leads to more collaboration on issues around out of school time that has an impact on how things are done in the next year, and leads to formal legislation with very broad buy-in that happens in the next council period, those outcomes are okay. I don't need to pass the bill for the sake of passing the bill. I need to strengthen the out of school time sector. And I feel very good that what we've done to date has achieved that. And the path we're on going forward is going to contribute further to do that.
And to just extend the analogy we were making earlier, you know, that the way to get to safety is not just through law enforcement. The way to get through government action for a council member is not necessarily through legislation. Legislation in a lot of ways is a blunt instrument. But if you can get there with the bully pulpit and with starting conversations and involving the public in the topic and raising awareness, maybe you don't even need to turn to that sort of heaviest of tools in your toolbox to meet your goal.
Oh, that's exactly right. My goal is not, I want to pass a bill, and I want to pass a bill that has input from all of the various stakeholders, but ultimately my goal is to strengthen the out-of-school time sector. And what if the process of putting forward a bill and then working with stakeholders achieves that, that achieves that. That's my goal. And so we'll see where it goes from here, but I feel good about where we are in terms of working together and shared goals.
Okay, well, let's pivot to our second topic, which is schools and schools in the context of the budget, which we are most of the way through the process now. Talk about how you think your Ward 3 schools fared in the budget process.
So I think in the end, my schools did okay. Not great. I don't want to oversell it, but I think we did well. But there's an issue around this that is important to me, and it's a thing that I've worked on for a decade. And where we are today is that the DCPS has a formula for how they calculate funding for individual schools. And they run that formula and it kicks out budgets for those schools. And they do have a little bit of an element of human intervention after that. They look and see if there are gaps that ought to be filled, but fundamentally they're driven by a formula. And my belief is no formula is going to be perfect, and that it requires human intervention. And so it didn't surprise me that when DCPS came out with their individual school budgets, they didn't hit the mark, missed the mark in significant ways in the Ward 3 schools in what the funding needs were. You really need to be looking at it school by school and testing what you're doing against a formula, not relying entirely on the formula. The next step in the process is the chairman has legislation, Schools First in Budgeting, that is another formula. And the chairman runs his formula and comes up with what kind of funding would be required, should be put forward to each school in order to maintain stability. And just as I think the DCPS formula is not going to be perfect, the chairman's formula, in my opinion, isn't perfect either and requires human intervention. What we did is when the DCPS budgets came out, I went to all of my school communities and I asked them, what do you need? What do you really need? I don't want your wish list, but I want to know what you really need in the coming year in order to be able to operate at the kind of level that you need to operate. And they told me. And it's a dozen schools, and I have relationships with people, principals and school parent leaders at all of those schools. And they were candid with me and told me what they needed. And so we maintained a spreadsheet, where we said, okay, this school needs this school needs that. The chairman came out and what it showed was that the schools in the Jackson Reed and MacArthur feeder systems needed about $5 million in order to operate in the way that they hope to operate. The chairman's Schools First in Budgeting allocations came out and they added to $5 million. The challenge was in added funds to schools in those two feeders. The challenge was they didn't match with what the schools had told me they needed. And so we were going to have some schools that were underfunded based on what they told me their realistic needs are, and some schools that were going to be overfunded based on what they told me what their needs were. And so we came forward with an amendment where we moved dollars around so they matched with what the schools had told me they needed before they saw the schools first in budgeting allocations. And all of the schools bought into and accepted that. And after that process, I can say all of the schools in the Jackson Reed and MacArthur feeder system have what they said they needed going forward. And that created some static when I moved that amendment, but I fundamentally think that is what we need to be doing at the end of this process, that we can have adult conversations where we can determine what is actually needed at each school and then meet those needs, and not simply rely on a formula that then may lead to overspending in one place and underspending in another. So I was very proud of the step that we were able to take. I hope next year we don't have to, and I'm happy to talk about that in different ways as well. But we need formulas because we need guardrails. But if we are so strapped to formulas that it leads to misinvestment, overinvestment in one, underinvestment in another, that we cannot abdicate responsibility for looking at what are the most responsible allocations to schools to actually meet their needs. And it's it's around 100 schools. We can do it. We can figure this out.
Yeah, I mean, the analogy that comes to mind for me, this isn't a tool that I've used at all for council communications, but there are now artificial intelligence tools where you can type send out a tweet referencing DC statehood and Flag Day with a jocular tone to it. And the AI engine in under 30 seconds will spit out a draft tweet. You're not supposed to hit publish on the draft tweet. It gets you disturbingly far to type this into the engine. So it's kind of letting the tools work. But then there's that last 5 or 10% of humanity, human involvement sometimes, that you could argue is necessary, that the tools help. The tools save time and save arguments and save politics and save squeaky wheel gets the grease. But just because an intelligent system spits out a result doesn't mean that there can't be around the edges a little kind of consensus modification.
That's exactly right. That you've got it. A different dimension on this, and this can get a little bit more controversial, is part of the challenge is DCPS doesn't get enough money. I mean, it wouldn't have taken much more money. The chairman in the end, took $30 million central and put it into schools, and then reduced that to be $20 million. And then central said that that was going to be very seriously adverse cuts and it was too much. But really what we're talking about there is $20 million on a budget of $1 billion, right? The DCPS budget, it's not that we're miles away from where we need to be, but what it took to get from what DCPS had originally done to a place where you're not really hearing complaints from schools today because they're satisfied with their budgets was $20 million. And this gets a little bit complicated and mathy, but the way in which we fund DCPS is we look at their projected enrollment for the coming year. And the way we look at their projected enrollment for the coming year is that we add up the projection for all of the schools, and maybe it adds up to 50,000. And then the city says, you know what, we expect that some number of children are going to arrive at the DCPS school in the middle of the year. So because as the matter of right system, DCPS the enrollment every year grows by a certain amount. And so we're gonna fund DCPS at 51,000. We're gonna add 1,000 for that cushion for mid-year mobility. And a thing that I have talked about for a long time is I think that that cushion should be larger. The reason I think that cushion should be larger is that as you look over time, DCPS gains a certain number of students in the middle of the year, and the charter sector loses a certain number of students after the audit and keeps the money for the students that they lose in the middle of the year. Some people say you should take that money away from the charter sector if they're losing students in the middle of the year. I actually don't think that's the answer, because a school needs to operate to serve the maximum number of kids that they have during the course of the year. And shifting gears in the middle of the year, having a budget cut where you then have to let somebody go, I don't think that's the way that you do it. But if the charter sector is getting money for kids who aren't there at the end of the year, and we should make sure, we should balance it and, in a sense, give DCPS a relatively equal amount for the kids that the charter schools are getting money for, but they're leaving in the middle of the year. If you took into account how many kids arrive at DCPS in the middle of the year, how many kids leave the charter sector in the middle of the year, and charter schools keep that money, that cushion for mid-year mobility should be 2,000, not 1,000. And if you added 1,000 students to that cushion, you would add over $20 million to the DCPS budget, and we would not have these issues. There's a way to solve this that's fair to both sectors, that doesn't have to be overly costly. And we need to be looking at how we're funding the sectors to make sure that we're fully funding both sectors. There's a lot of talk out there that the charter sector is the one that is underfunded. I don't believe that's true. I think DCPS is the one that's underfunded. And I think when you look at the accumulated net assets and cash on hand in the charter sector, it's hard to say this is a sector that is underfunded. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars in cash on hand and in accumulated net assets. Let's make sure we're being fair, including to DCPS, and then we don't have to have these issues every year.
Yes, that's a meaty topic that I think unfortunately we'll have to return to another day, because I want to make sure we pivot once again. And I think the third topic we had planned on discussing, we might need to kick to our next episode, because I want to make sure we're already at time, but I want to make sure we get to the fun round, because we always have to do the fun round.
Okay.
And you'll remember from your previous appearance that I asked you a series of tasks, and I wanted you to let me know which of your colleagues you thought would be best suited to tackle this task. And the last time we did this, like I said, was about a year ago. So now you have another year of getting to know your colleagues. So you'll have another year of knowledge behind who you want to tackle these tasks with. So the first task is a camping trip or a walk in the woods. Which of your colleagues do you think would be best suited or most fun to do that with, and why?
I think Robert White would be a lot of fun to do that, although I'd worry that he would walk too quickly. I have a long-standing friendship with Robert. I think he's a great guy. I think it would be fun to do something like that with him.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, how about if there was a tough customer support phone issue, if you were on the phone with a utility or an unnamed retailer, and they were just giving you a tough time, in addition to you being able to talk your way out of it, which I'm sure you could, which of your colleagues would you want to pull into that process and have on your side, and why?
I think I'd go with Brooke on that. I think in the intervening year, in a setting of a lot of very difficult conversations, and in a setting where in some instances inflammatory things were said. It was really impressive to see the way in which she handled herself as she went through the security seat process, managed all of the different stakeholders, and landed the plane with a very broad consensus, a consensus that included the mayor and the chief and almost all of the members of the council. I think that was a really astonishing achievement of diplomacy and skill. And I think that makes me think she could handle a recalcitrant retailer.
Okay, good answer. Good answer. How about whose Rolodex would you want to borrow? Either just because you think they'd have the best Rolodex, or because they have a Rolodex that would fill gaps in years.
It's cheating a little, but I think that the person who has to have the most incredible Rolodex anywhere is Phil Mendelssohn. And so in terms of touching the largest number of residents around the city and stakeholders around the city, there's nobody like him. And I work a lot. I barely think of it as work. It's not uncommon. A 12-hour day is a short day for me. And I do take the occasional day off, but I work a lot and feel very, very privileged to work as much as I do. Phil Mendelssohn is a machine. I mean, he is everywhere and has forged relationships with so many people around the city. I don't know if he maintains a Rolodex, but his web of connections and relationships and ability to draw an input from various different people is pretty impressive. I would love to be able to tap into that. I should say on the recalcitrant retailer one, Brooke Pinto in the security seat did an extraordinary job of managing that process. Chairman Mendelssohn in the budget process and in all of it, like, it is a lot to herd 13 cats with pressure from all different sides, and it is pretty remarkable. We don't agree on every single thing. I try to be very upfront with the chairman about what I agree with him and what I don't agree with him on. But his ability to manage the council, he probably could also handle a recalcitrant retail.
That is true. And as to whether or not he has a Rolodex, I know he has several typewriters in his office. So I think the most likely person to have a literal Rolodex in their office is probably the chairman. Okay, we'll do two more quickly, and then I'll let you go. Who would you want to give you a dance lesson?
I feel like Brienne is a good dancer. I feel like I've seen Brienne on videos, Councilmember Nadeau, like at a party doing different dances. So I think I'd go with Brienne based on she's the one I've seen dancing the most. I think I've seen Brooke also, but I'm gonna go with Brienne because I already went with Brooke on something else.
Gotcha. And surprisingly, the chairman. All of the dances
right?
with pre-designated steps that seem to pop up at all the community events. I was never more startled than when I figured out that Phil Mendelssohn knows all of those dances with names that you do as a group.
So I'm still, even if he knows all the steps and Brienne knows all the steps, I'm still going with Brienne on the dance list.
Probably a wise choice. And the final question is, of all of your colleagues, whose poetry, this is based on a premise that all your colleagues write poetry, which I don't know that they do, but assume they all write poetry. Whose poetry would you most want to read and why?
I think Zachary and Janice are the ones who on the dais most frequently do, or at the breakfast will do an impassioned speech that has the capacity to move my position. I can think of a couple of places with each of them where I went in leaning one way and I left leaning another way, and it was because of the way in which they framed and delivered their arguments. That's different than poetry, but it makes me think I'd be interested to read their poetry.
Gotcha. Evocative language is evocative language, regardless.
That's well put. Well put. I hate to
and
leave anybody out. I think we should keep going so I can name everybody. Because one of the things that I will say, and that strikes me, is, you know, I'm if I'm not the oldest, well, I'm pretty old compared to many of my colleagues, and I am so impressed by the skill and commitment of the people I work with on the council. I mean, I don't know that I didn't expect that, but I am struck. As you know, we go through this process, we don't always agree. There's places where we disagree pretty strenuously, but it is a very impressive group of people.
Yeah, and there's a demonstration of strength and diversity in terms of the diversity of age, place, race, background, you name it, is very close at hand when you hear the council members discussing things.
And I get to fill the niche of old white man, but somebody should.
Right, that the shrinking, but still it's important it's their niche. And the last question, which I've stopped asking, because I asked whose poetry you would least want to read, and every single council member said Chairman Mendelson. So I'm just, to use legal language, we're just going to stipulate that Phil Mendelson's poetry is the least popular, unless you have a different answer.
I think I'll take the safe harbor of the stipulated.
Yes, I think that's wise. Well, sadly, we're at time. We're over time. But I again just wanted to express my gratitude for you taking the time out for participating in the show. And listeners, I want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast on SoundCloud or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search under Hearing the Council. Thanks, listeners. Thanks again for joining us. Tune in next time. We're on DC Radio at 96.3 on your FM HD4 dial or at dcradio.gov. I'm Josh Gibson. This is not a council hearing. This is Hearing the Council. Thank you so much, Councilmember Frumin. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.